Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today, we're diving deep into, well, it's a bit of a modern classic, I guess, The Fatal Conceit by F.A. Hayek.
Yeah, a real thought-provoking one, that's for sure. It kind of makes you rethink, well, some pretty fundamental assumptions about how societies actually, work, maybe even human nature, when you really get into it.
Yeah, gotta admit, the title threw me off a bit at first. The Fatal Conceit sounds kind of ominous, like almost like a thriller novel or something. Haha.
Mhm.
So what is this fatal conceit? And more importantly, why should we even care?
Well, Hayek comes right out and says it. He's going after this deeply ingrained human tendency, this belief that we can and should, design our way to a better society.
Mm.
He calls it the fatal conceit because, well, he thinks it leads us down a dangerous path. We underestimate how complex social and economic systems really are, and overestimate, big time, our ability to actually control them.
So it's this faith in our own ability to reason, to plan, to sort of engineer the perfect world that he sees as the problem.
Exactly that's it in a nutshell. He argues it ignores centuries of human history and experience. We've seen it time and time again, right? The most successful societies, they don't come from some grand plan. They emerge organically.
Okay, so no more grand plans. Got it.
Right.
But if we can't reason our way to a better world, what are we supposed to do? Just like sit back and hope for the best?
Well, not quite. That's where things get really interesting. Hayek says the alternative to, this top-down rationalistic approach, it isn't chaos. It's a different kind of order, what he calls spontaneous order.
Spontaneous order. Okay, now you're just using big words to scare me. Ha ha. What does that even mean?
Haha, fair enough. It does sound a bit abstract, but picture this, okay. A flock of birds flying in formation. They move with such incredible precision, such coordination. You'd almost think there's a leader up there calling the shots, right?
Yeah, totally.
But there isn't. No single bird is in charge. Those intricate patterns, they emerge from the interactions of each individual bird, each one responding to the movements of those around it.
Wow. Okay, I see where you're going with this. So you're saying, just like those birds, individuals in a free society, each acting on their own knowledge and incentives, can create this kind of order that's, well, more complex and efficient than anything we can just, like, design ourselves.
Precisely. That's exactly it. This spontaneous order, it's what allows us to achieve things on a scale that would be impossible through just central planning. Think about language, for example. No one sat down and invented language, did they?
True. I guess not when you put it like that.
It evolved organically over time through the interactions of, well, countless individuals, each adding their own little piece to the puzzle.
That's true. Never thought about it that way. We take language for granted. But yeah, it's a pretty incredible example of how complexity can just emerge without some like central planner calling the shot. So how does this spontaneous order thing, how does it actually work in practice? Like what are the mechanisms, I guess, that make it possible?
Right, so Hayek identifies several key institutions. He sees these as essential for a functioning market order. And it's these institutions that, well, we often take for granted, or worse, we misunderstand and undermine them even with good intentions.
Sounds familiar. Like that saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So what are these institutions Hayek's so concerned about?
He spends a lot of time on the importance of private property, for one.
Okay, private property. Now, that's one of those things that people, they have some strong opinions about. So what's Hayek's take?
He says it's not just about stuff. Private property is about incentives. It encourages individuals to use their knowledge and talents productively. If you know you own the fruits of your labor, well, you're more likely to invest your time and energy to actually create something of value.
Okay, that makes sense. When you've got skin in the game, you're more likely to put in the effort. But isn't that a bit simplistic? What about things like inheritance, where people inherit wealth that they didn't actually earn themselves?
Even inheritance, Hayek would say, as unfair as it seems sometimes. It serves a purpose within the market order. It allows for capital accumulation, which then gets reinvested, right? New ventures, innovations. It also provides a kind of continuity. Businesses and family enterprises, they can be passed down through generations.
Right, so it's not just about individuals then. It's about creating the conditions where those individuals can take risks, build upon the work of those who came before, and ultimately contribute to a system that, yeah, benefits everyone, even if it's not always clear how. Okay, so private property, check. What other institutions are we talking about here?
Another big one, trade.
Trade, okay. Seems pretty straightforward, people exchanging goods and services. But what's the big deal from Hayek's perspective?
He argues it's more than just swapping stuff. Trade is vital for information sharing. Every time you buy something, think about it. You're sending a signal to the market about what you value, what you're willing to pay for. And those signals, aggregated across millions of transactions, they tell producers what to produce, how much, where to direct their resources.
That is interesting. This constant feedback loop driven by, well, just our choices as consumers. But
Yeah.
how does that actually translate into this spontaneous order we were talking about?
Imagine a world without trade for a second.
Okay.
You'd be limited to consuming only what you could produce yourself.
Right, which in my case wouldn't be much. Let's just say my baking skills leave. Something to be desired. Uh-huh.
Haha, right, exactly. But with trade, you can specialize. Do what you're good at, what you enjoy, then exchange the fruits of your labor for, well, whatever else you need and want. This specialization, driven by trade, it creates the incredible diversity and abundance that we see in any modern economy. And it happens without some central planner dictating who should do what.
It really is amazing when you stop and think about it. This whole intricate web of interactions, all driven by just individual choices, creates something so complex and interconnected, like a giant puzzle where every piece has its place, but no one's holding the picture on the box.
That's a great analogy. And it's this emergent complexity, this ability to adapt and innovate without a central plan. That's the true strength of the market order, according to Hayek.
So we've got private property, we've got trade, but there's another thing, right? Something else that's always there in the background, something we need for any kind of order, spontaneous or designed. Rules. What about rules? What's Hayek's take on the role of rules in a free society?
You're absolutely right. Can't have a functioning society without rules. Doesn't matter if we're talking about a small tribe or, a global economy. Hayek was all about the rule of law. But, and this is important, not just any rules would do.
Okay, so not just any old rules. What makes for good rules in Hayek's book? Especially when we're talking about something as, well, as messy and unpredictable as the market.
Right. So for Hayek, good rules, the kind that actually make a free market work, they need to be general and abstract. They should set up the framework, the ground rules for interaction. But they shouldn't try to dictate every little outcome.
Okay, so rather than trying to micromanage every single transaction, good rules should be more about setting the stage, letting the actors do their thing. Can you give me an example of that? This is where I start to lose the plot a bit.
Sure, think of a rule like don't steal. It's not telling you what to do, it's telling you what not to do. It sets a boundary, right? Within that boundary, you're free to do your thing. Pursue your own interests, trade, create, whatever.
Okay, yeah, I get that. And I'm guessing those boundaries, those constraints, they create this sense of predictability, of stability, which is what people need to actually plan for the future, to take risks, to invest.
Exactly. When people know the rules are fair, that they're going to be applied consistently, and that some central authority isn't going to come in and just change them on a whim. Well, they're much more likely to participate in the market, engage in long-term planning, and ultimately contribute to the overall prosperity of society.
Right, so it's kind of like laying a foundation. If the foundation's strong, stable, you can build pretty much anything on top of it. But if it's shaky, if you're worried about the rules changing all the time, you're not going to want to build anything too high, are you?
Perfect analogy. And this is actually where Hayek brings his critique of socialism back in. He argues that socialist policies, even when they're well-intentioned, often end up undermining these very foundations, the foundations of a free and prosperous society.
Okay, so let's talk about that. We've been kind of dancing around the S word this whole time. How does Hayek connect his critique of socialism back to this idea of spontaneous order and the importance of rules?
Well, Hayek argues that socialist policies, they often come from that same fatal conceit we were talking about earlier, this belief that we can just, design our way to a better world.
So instead of letting the market do its thing, letting this spontaneous order emerge from the interactions of individuals, socialists want to impose a plan, like a blueprint, on the whole system.
Exactly. They see inequality, they see people struggling, and they think, we can fix this. We just need to redistribute wealth more fairly. We need to plan production more rationally, control prices. But Hayek would say all those interventions, even with the best intentions, they often backfire.
How so?
Take price controls, for example. Seems like a good idea on the surface, right? Make sure essential goods are affordable for everyone. But what happens when you set a price ceiling on something like bread?
Well, if I remember my Econ 101, which, who knows, haha, when the price is artificially low, demand goes up, supply goes down, you end up with shortages.
Exactly. And those shortages, they end up hurting the very people price controls were supposed to help. The poor, the vulnerable,
Right, it's like this unintended consequence. And it's not just price controls, is it? Hayek would say this about a lot of socialist policies,
Right.
that they might start with good intentions, but they end up messing with the delicate balance of the market.
Absolutely. He argues that attempts to, say, redistribute wealth, they can disincentivize work and investment. Attempts to centrally plan production often lead to inefficiency, waste, and the more the government intervenes in the market, the more it distorts those price signals, the signals that are so essential for coordinating economic activity.
So it's not that Hayek is against helping people in need. It's that he sees these top-down interventions as, well, ultimately counterproductive. He thinks they undermine the very system that historically has done the most to lift people out of poverty.
Exactly. And he'd argue that a much more effective way to help people is to create the conditions for a thriving market order. Strong property rights, free trade, sound money, a stable legal framework.
So it's about empowering individuals to create wealth, not trying to just redistribute it after the fact.
That's a big part of it, yeah. But Hayek also talks about the importance of cultural evolution. He says the institutions and traditions that make a free and prosperous society possible, they don't just appear overnight. They evolve over time through trial and error, adaptation, selection.
Like that spontaneous order thing again, but on a societal level.
Yeah.
We're all part of this big experiment, figuring out what works, what doesn't.
Exactly. And Hayek's point is we should be very careful about just tossing those traditions aside.
These hard-won lessons, just because we have some utopian vision in our heads.
He's basically saying, hey, we might not always understand why these systems work, but we mess with them at our own peril.
It's a message that's, I don't know, both humbling and a little terrifying at the same time.
It is, but it's also incredibly relevant to the world we live in today. We're constantly being told we need more government intervention, more centralized planning, that there are these simple solutions to complex problems. But we rarely stop to think about the unintended consequences.
And that's where Hayek is so valuable. He makes us take a step back, look at the bigger picture, appreciate the complexity of the systems we're dealing with, and be very careful about assuming we know better than, well, than the combined wisdom of everyone who came before us.
And maybe most importantly, he reminds us that true progress, real lasting prosperity, doesn't come from top-down control. It comes from empowering individuals, letting them pursue their own goals within a framework of just and predictable rules.
So it's not about imposing our will on the world. It's about creating the conditions where human creativity, human ingenuity can actually flourish.
Exactly. And that, I think, is a really powerful message, no matter what your political beliefs are.
You know, it's funny. You think about economics, and it's like this dry, technical field. But Hayek's book, it's not like that at all. It's actually full of these really profound insights about human nature, about the limits of reason, even about language, and how it shapes our whole understanding of the world.
Absolutely, yeah. Hayek really got that economics, it's not just numbers and graphs. It's about people, how we interact, how societies actually evolve, how we create the conditions for both individual freedom and collective prosperity. It's a delicate balance.
And one thing that really struck me was his discussion of money. I mean, we use it every day, right?
Yeah.
But how often do we actually stop and think about, like, what it even is, how it works, why it's so important?
Yeah, it's easy to take for granted. Hayek actually devotes a whole chunk of the Fatal Conceit to this, to explaining why money is so often misunderstood, even demonized, especially by, well, those who are pushing for a more quote-unquote just or equitable society.
Yeah, it's like money has this bad reputation, you know, like it's inherently dirty or corrupting or something.
Hayek would say that distrust, it comes partly from our evolutionary history. For most of human existence, wealth was, well, it's tangible, right? Land, crops, livestock, things you could see and touch. Money, on the other hand, it's abstract. It represents value, but it's not value in itself.
Right, and that's kind of hard to wrap your head around. Like, I get that this dollar bill in my pocket, I can exchange it for stuff, but where does its value even come from? How can something that's essentially just a piece of paper, or even just like numbers on a screen, how can it have so much power?
Hayek's argument is it's all about trade. Money's power comes from its ability to facilitate trade and specialization. Without it, we'd be stuck in a barter economy, trying to trade your podcasting skills for groceries. Haha.
Don't even get me started. Haha, that'd be a nightmare.
Exactly. But with money, you've got this medium of exchange, universally accepted, makes everything so much smoother.
Right, so it's like this lubricant, this oil that keeps the whole machine running.
And the more complex the economy, the more vital that lubricant becomes.
Okay, that makes sense.
Especially in a globalized world like ours, right? We rely on these intricate supply chains, this incredibly specialized knowledge from all over the place. Trying to manage all that without money, it'd be impossible.
So next time I'm like instinctively recoiling at the thought of money, gotta remind myself, it's also the foundation for a lot of good in the world.
Definitely. Because a society without money, or where access to it is severely limited, it's usually a society characterized by scarcity, by stagnation, by a lack of opportunity. And those who suffer most, the poorest, the most vulnerable, always.
So wow, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Yeah.
Spontaneous order, the limits of reason, private property, trade, even money. If there's like one big takeaway, one aha moment you hope listeners walk away with, what would it be?
That's a good question. For me, the most powerful message in The Fatal Conceit, it's a call for humility. Hayek's really urging us to be wary of these grand schemes, these utopian visions, this belief that we can just, engineer a perfect society. The world's just too complex, people are too unpredictable.
It's that fatal conceit again.
Yeah, exactly. Thinking we know better than centuries of accumulated wisdom, that we can just control systems that have been evolving for, well, longer than any of us have been alive.
So instead of trying to impose our will on the world, we should focus on creating the conditions where human ingenuity can actually flourish, where that spontaneous order can emerge.
Absolutely. It's about empowering individuals, letting them make their own choices, learn from their mistakes, and create a better future together within a framework of just and predictable rules. That's key.
That's a message that's, I don't know, it's both exciting and a little daunting at the same time.
It is, isn't it?
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into The Fatal Conceit, a book that honestly has given me a lot to think about. So thank you so much for coming on the show and for taking this journey with me.
It's been my pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
And for our listeners, we encourage you, go check out the book. Grapple with Hayek's ideas yourselves. You might not agree with everything, and hey, we certainly don't. But it will make you think and maybe even see the world in a whole new light.
And as always, we want to hear from you. Let us know what you think. Share your thoughts on social media. Use the hashtag #TheDeepDiveHayek.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep